Hey guys, so I'm Andy, and I wanted to give y'all a sort of a taste of what our literature classes will be like in QB Camp. So, without further ado, here we go. I'll read this question, and y'all feel free to answer it, and I'll tell you what the answer is after I finish reading it. So, one character in this novel gives up reading a book of sermons to a group of girls to play backgammon with the protagonist's father, who is in danger of losing property to him. The protagonist's neighbor, Charlotte Lucas, marries the snobbish clergyman, Mr. Collins, whose employer, Lady Catherine, disapproves of the protagonist's relationship with her nephew. That nephew resolves the scandal resulting from Lydia's elopement with Wickham. Later in this novel, Mr. Bingley finally proposes to Jane, much to the protagonist's delight. For 10 points, name this Jane Austen novel ending with Elizabeth Bennet marrying Fitzwilliam Darcy. Okay, so if you didn't get it, that's alright. The answer is Pride and Prejudice. Okay, so a few of the important clues from this, and there are a lot of them, are all the proper nouns basically. So Charlotte Lucas, Mr. Collins, Lady Catherine, we have Lydia, Wickham, Mr. Bingley, Jane. It's written by Jane Austen. Elizabeth Bennet is our protagonist, and Fitzwilliam Darcy. That's a lot of proper nouns, and it's really easy to get these confused. I mean, especially as we start throwing in other books. So if we start taking the characters in Persuasion, and Emma, and Wuthering Heights, and Sense and Sensibility, and Jane Eyre, and all of those, and we toss them all together, those are a ton of names. And the thing is, especially with like English and British literature, a lot of the useful clues are also place names that they didn't mention. So like just in Pride and Prejudice, we have Meryton is the town near the Bennet's home. Longbourn is the name of the Bennet's home. We have Pemberley, which is where Mr. Darcy lives. We have Netherfield, which is where Mr. Bingley lives. Again, more names. We have Rosings, where Lady Catherine lives, and so on and so forth. And so clearly that's a lot of names. That's a lot of, between the place names and the names of the characters, that's a lot. And it's kind of hard to remember sometimes, unless you've read it, right? And by the way, everyone should read Pride and Prejudice. It is an amazing book. Possibly the best book ever written. Okay, anyways, so the thing is, this can be kind of confusing after a while, especially once we get to the other books. So what really helps is you have to get a feel of the different books and the different authors and their styles. And that's what's really going to help you be able to get all these literature questions. So literature is easy in the sense that it's not conceptually challenging the way, say, science is, where you have to be able to understand why these different things are happening, right? Literature is, you need to be able to match all these different proper nouns to the books or authors or whatnot that they come from. And there are a lot of books and authors and whatnot. So that's what makes it difficult. So we have to be able to differentiate these. Okay, so in order to do that, let's break down this toss-up here. So if we look at the first line, that first clue, it gives us a few hints. So unless you've actually read the book a ton or very recently, you probably didn't know this clue, and that's fine. Not very many people will. So, and that's the point. But we can still get useful information out of this. So first of all, of course, it says this novel, right? That's kind of useful to know that we're looking for a book and not like Jane Austen as the answer line. But then after that, it describes the scene, right? So this scene is going to not give us very much information necessarily on a specific, telling us what specific book, but it will give us sort of the mood of the book that we're looking for. So if we look at it, it talks about playing backgammon and then also a book of sermons. So this can sort of set the stage for us of, okay, your mind will, or at least my mind, starts to think British literature, specifically like Regency era type stuff. So just based on this, I would probably say that it's a Bronte work or an Austen work. And guess what? It is an Austen work, right? Well, we know that later. But based on just that, I could guess one of those two things, okay? And then I would probably wait to hear more clues about figuring out whether it's by Bronte or if it's by Jane Austen. And the way you do that is the Brontes and Jane Austen have very different feels to them. So Jane Austen tends to be more refined, more genteel with her works, versus the Brontes have darker sort of broody type works. So like, okay, so like for example, in Pride and Prejudice, in the scene they're describing, it's very like refined. They're playing backgammon or reading about religion, and that's fine. Versus in Wuthering Heights, the opening scene is this guy walks into the house, and then they're at dinner, and the owner leaves, and then his dogs start like attacking the protagonist, or our narrator anyways, and a servant has to come back and physically beat back these dogs, right? So there's a lot more violence. It's like more moody, brooding type work. And so sort of getting this feel of the different works will help us be able to make educated guesses to try and figure out what it is. Okay, so like if we look at this first line, we figured out, okay, it's probably a Bronte or an Austen, right? And now we're going to try and figure out which one it is. So we go to the next line and says, the protagonist's neighbor, Charlotte Lucas, marries the snobbish clergyman, Mr. Collins. Okay, so that could still be either of either the Brontes or Austen, because people get married in both. But again, it's sort of this like happier sort of feeling, more like refined and not like super violent, right? So we already start leaning towards Austen. And I mean, honestly, if you heard of the clue, or you think you might have heard of Charlotte Lucas, that would be a good place to buzz right there. And so whereas someone else who just like tries to brute force memorize all of these names, I mean, maybe they'll remember Charlotte Lucas and they'll buzz in. But here's the thing, you've already started thinking Jane Austen. And so when you buzz in, you can buzz in half a second before that other person who's memorized Charlotte Lucas, and you'll win the buzzer race and you'll get the points for that. And that's probably pretty good power, right? Okay, now beyond just that, in general, with literature, it really does help to read the books. I've read, not all of it, not nowhere near all of the canon, but I've read a lot of them. And so I love Pride and Prejudice, especially. You should totally read that again. But even if you can't, because obviously there are a lot of books, what really helps is if you just read like the first 2 or 3 chapters, you get a bunch of the major characters, maybe not all of them, but you'll get most of the major characters. You'll kind of get the relationships to each other, and you'll get a small sense of the plot. And a lot of times that's actually enough to get the questions. Like for the longest while, I had read like 3 chapters of Catch-22, and based on those 3 chapters, I was able to, first and second line, most Catch-22 questions. So again, yeah, y'all should definitely read these, and I hope that helped. If it did, please consider registering for QB Camp, and I hope to see y'all soon.